All right, everybody, it is John Pollock. We are back here on Post Wrestling and the seventh season of Dark Side of the Ring. It is returning Tuesday night, July 7th, with the first two of three parts on Jeff Jarrett and TNA, and that requires the return to Post Wrestling of Evan Husney to chat about the upcoming season and trying to tell the TNA story in 3 hours. I feel you could tell the first 3 months of TNA and need 3 hours of time, and as we can see, the story of TNA, it never ends, but the guarantee is that that company will outlive both of us, Evan.
It's so true. Oh man, yes. Well, thank you, John, for having me back. It's always awesome being here. Yeah, this is crazy, but we're doing the TNA saga, trying to fit it in those 3 hours. I mean, hey, this was supposed to be a 2 hour program, and it existed as such for a very long time until we had a panic that there was no way this was going to be. There'd be no way to fit it all into that, and we had to beg and we had to plead for an extra hour, which thankfully the network gave to us at the final 11th hour, and scrambled and re-edited everything. But yeah, we're here and we're excited. I'm very stoked for people to check it out. It's an epic story, man, for sure.
You mentioned in an interview you recently did with Jim Cornette that this was like the idea was potentially doing its own sort of spin-off series, like a
Yeah.
six-part series with an incredible title. I will give you guys credit for the Six Sides of TNA. Like that
Yeah.
would be like if I had 8 parts, I would condense it just to make that title work. It was really great. How far was that into the process? Was that just a pitch?
Yeah.
Was that ever on the getting past just the pitching stage?
It was it was a pitch, and like we had written it all up, we had researched it, we had a bunch of folks on our team working on it. It was sort of the natural evolution going from when we did Who Killed WCW 2 years ago now, whatever that was. And the thought was we could kind of repurpose doing a multi-part spin-off miniseries, about WCW. Maybe then we could examine TNA, because that story is even more rich. We had thought, like, wow, there's so much drama and twists and turns and personal tragedy and like just emotion and heartbreak and backstabbing in that story. And so, yeah, it was going to be 6 parts, because we looked at it and said, "There's no way to do this whole saga in 2 or 3 or 4." And that was going to be the entire company's history. It was going to be not just only the Jeff Jarrett, tenure, but it was also going to be the Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, Dixie Carter. Going to get into the Scott D'Amore era, or even like the Billy Corgan era. Like it was encompassing the whole thing. But yeah, for whatever reason, it didn't. We couldn't get it across the green light finish line at the time, and Vice was just really bullish on Dark Side of the Ring. I mean, that this series has continued to prove itself, and continues to draw the audience, and people are interested in it, and it seems to be doing very well still, which I'm incredibly grateful and just blown away by every day that we're still doing this show. But they were like, "What if you did this for Dark Side of the Ring? Can't you just do it for Dark Side of the Ring?" And I was like, "Well, it would be tough, and we would need some serious runtime." And the only way I could see doing it was sort of taking what we had planned and researched and trying to truncate it down to just Jeff's POV, and and tracking Jeff Jarrett's kind of rise and fall through the company, and zeroing in on that. And that actually proved to be, I don't know, maybe that's the most interesting version of it, because it really gives you that like emotional center to the story and someone to track and follow through the whole journey. And so I think that was like maybe the right move at the end of the day. So I'm happy at where it landed, although it could have been this epic sprawling doc series.
What, after spending time with Jeff and focusing on these 3 episodes, what were some of your takeaways just in terms of, like, for all that Jeff Jarrett has done in his career? I think when the story is written on Jeff Jarrett, TNA is going to be right at the top of that list in terms of his
Mhm.
legacy. Did you get the sense this was this guy's baby, and he was kind of,
Mhm.
sent to the side, was part of this, like, Jeff trying to, kind of convey, like, his impact, pardon the pun, on this promotion, and what it did coming up in the 2000s, facing many hurdles along the way, and then he's kind of just out of power and ousted aside.
Yeah, it's a wild story. I think Jeff is one of the few people on planet Earth at that time who could have done something like starting a, alternative wrestling brand on a national scale, right? Because this is all after, in the shadow of WCW folding, WWE buying WCW, the industry is consolidating on a mainstream level. And Jeff is a very unique person with a lot of drive and vision, and because he grew up in this household of his father Jerry Jarrett, one of the most successful wrestling promoters, and his grandmother Teenie Jarrett, who is one of the most successful female promoters of all time. And he grew up understanding the business at such a young age and what it takes and the business of it and what's possible with it. And I think for him to take that risk, with his father, him and Jerry started TNA together. There's just not many people who would do that, because there's a lot of people who've tried or looked at the wrestling industry as, oh, even if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't sink money into this industry, but they did it. I mean, there was no place left for Jeff to work after, he was, quote unquote, fired by Vince McMahon on TV on the episode of Nitro, or Nitro / Raw, when Vince bought the company, bought WCW. There was no place for him to go, so he's like, well, I better create my own place then, I guess. And he's somebody who has that moxie and that drive to do that sort of thing. And I also just have a tremendous amount of respect for Jeff too, because growing up, watching him on WWF television, it's like he's this kind of middle of the card, arrogant heel, kind of cheesy heel that, like, maybe, I don't know. He never resonated much with me as a character when I was watching him growing up. Like, but then to get to know him now and to see that, wow, Jeff, I think Conrad Thompson refers to him as like the Forrest Gump of wrestling. He's this guy who kind of always winds up being at the crossroads of these major turning points in the industry. He's always present, he's there, and he's also resilient, and I think from a storytelling point of view, there's just a nice sort of metaphor in the idea of, TNA, like the story of TNA is also the story of Jeff Jarrett, in a sense that they both are so resilient and they both keep bouncing back from impossible odds, and I think that's what's cool, I think, about this whole story, is it has that at the core. But there is, much to people who might not be as familiar with Jeff's story and or TNA story, there's a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of darkness. There's tragedy. There's loss. There's addiction. There's a lot of the elements that you may not think would be associated with a show like ours that are definitely prevalent here in this story. So I'm excited for people to see it and experience the roller coaster ride of, TNA.
I'm sure there was outreach. I'm curious what the interactions, if they existed, involving Dixie Carter, for the obvious, counterpoint, the obvious, segue to Jeff Jarrett's tenure in TNA. Tell me about anything you can share regarding Dixie Carter and her attitude towards whatever you guys pitched.
Yeah, I mean, going back to when we had it as the 6 sides of TNA and wanted to do like a bigger piece, like the whole concept was like a huge part of the foundation to the concept on paper was Dixie Carter, as someone who hasn't done an interview on this subject really, in a very long time. She turns down a lot of interviews historically from what I'd heard, but like if we could get her and, to tell her story, to show her side of this whole thing, because obviously, because she doesn't participate in interviews, that leaves everybody else to be able to tell his, to write history, so to speak, right? And to have and to share their own opinions, which are very loud in terms of, subjects pertaining to her, right? So I thought it would be fresh and exciting to have her sit down, tell her side of the story. I'm sure there's ways in which she deserves, her flowers for the things that she accomplished in TNA, as well too, and in the wrestling business. And that would have been a great opportunity to do that too. So in the back of my mind, I've always been so optimistic, like rarely have we pursued someone and not been able to get them on camera or get them to sit down in the proverbial chair, but this was a series of reach outs. Jeff even reached out on our behalf because they're on good terms today. And it was like, I just, it all felt really positive to me. And we wound up having I think a few conversations with her, and she was very clear about just not wanting to revisit the past of TNA and sort of examine that. Like, that's what's in the past is in the past, and she wants to move forward. I'm paraphrasing, but that was kind of the idea. And so I thought at the end of the day, there would be a version of it where we could, and then all of our follow-ups at a certain point just kind of went unanswered, and it just kind of petered out, and we had to move on because, you're on a production schedule and you gotta turn this show in at a certain point. And we just stopped hearing back after a certain point in time. And maybe she knew that, there's obviously a lot of criticisms about whatever choices she made or things that happened back then in TNA that she wouldn't have wanted to talk about, which I understand. But if you're not going to talk about it, then then everybody else is, and then you're not there to defend yourself or to tell your version of the story. And so I think it's unfortunate. I think I wish she would have, but the story, I think, without her participation is also just as strong, because it is told mostly through the lens of Jeff. But in a perfect world, Dixie's point of view would have added a lot too.
Yeah, I remember years ago hearing about her being like linked to a book project, and then the book just never came to pass. And it was sort of interesting to me that there was at least, that interest, but then it didn't come to pass. And I don't know if it's she doesn't want to cover you have to pretty much go through like the highs and the many lows of TNA, and maybe that's a history she just does not want to revisit. But to your point, I think it's a vantage point I think everyone would want to hear from.
Yeah, absolutely.
This season also, like last season, you did an episode dedicated to the Hell in a Cell between Mick Foley and The Undertaker. This year, you're focusing on Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher, which I don't think has the visibility of the Hell in a Cell match. But
not
anyone
yet.
who has seen this, I mean, it is a very famous match. Tell me a little bit about how you arrived at this specific match and that this required its own episode.
Well, sometimes we can take great liberties with this platform that we have, and sometimes we decide we don't do this all the time, but sometimes it's like, okay, we have this series and, which is amazing. It's incredible that we even have this opportunity, but sometimes you just want to do what you want to see on TV, and it's like, nobody necessarily asked for this, but who cares? Let's do it. And this was a match for me that I definitely remember hearing about, seeing on the internet a long time ago. And then I came across this video from a YouTuber named Justin Wang out on YouTube, and he had done this really great 20-minute deep dive on the match that was sort of like, this is the greatest match of all time, like really putting it on a pedestal. And I was like, okay, wow, that got me to click, So I watched the video and I was like, yeah, this is magic. This is, yes, it's two guys literally beating the ever-loving shit out of each other on, in a match, and it's like pretty much real. And we're watching, an insane street fight, it's crazy. But I was kind of, I was curious, like what, we had such a great time doing that Hell in a Cell episode with Mick, because look, we've been doing this show for so long, and, next year is going to be my 10th year working on this show. And there was something that was like a breath of fresh air doing the Hell in a Cell episode, where it was like, most times I feel like, we kind of arbitrarily decided 10 years ago that this was going to be an hour-long series. Every episode was going to be 44 minutes with commercials. And, that in practice is very difficult. We've never in 70 episodes of the show, we've never had an episode where it's like, man, we got to really stretch this part, because there really isn't much here. And, it's always the opposite. It's always been cutting, trimming down, and trying to jam a story into a very short runtime. Like every episode of the show could be feature length. It could be 90 minutes. Every one could be. But what we found with doing Hell in the Cell, like giving even more focus to a story, Like, we're just going to tell a story about 18 minutes, like that's how long the match was, right? So we're going to forensically go through one match. And then, of course, that match is significant because it's the archetypal, it's the microcosm of Mick's career. It says everything you need to know about Mick as an individual and his philosophy towards wrestling. And it has all the dramatic stakes of like, oh my God, he could have died. And, of course, there's all these physiological effects that he's dealing with now to this day. It's changed him in many ways. And it's complicated emotionally and things like that. So for us, that sandbox of working in like, let's do 1 hour on one match just felt very exciting and new, and was cool. So then it was like, okay, clicking on that YouTube video, watching it, and kind of reappreciating the match and being like, okay, what would Necro Butcher and Joe say about this match? What was on the line for them? How does this represent them as performers? What are the stakes going into it? How did it come together? And then if you were to go through every spot in the match and kind of like make them revisit it, tell the story behind it, tell us the stories of the things that we're not seeing with our own eyes, and so on and so forth. Then it just became really exciting. And then you make phone calls and Joe's like, yeah, I'm in. And Necro Butcher's like, sure, and then you're like, wow, this could be great. And it was awesome. It was just it's an exhilarating hour of TV because it's obviously very violent match, but it does also bring to light what was going on in the indies at that time. That was such an exciting time for the indies. Like, the next generation of talent came out of that, and like what was going on with ROH and all that stuff. And of course, the rise of the internet fan culture, message boards, and what dream matches people wanted to see, and how like, the fan internet interaction kind of bled into wrestling booking and things like that. So yeah, so I think it's a cool time capsule of that period of time, but also just like, here is one of the craziest, most violent, insane matches you've ever seen, and let's go deep on it.
I find it such an interesting compliment to like the Undertaker McFoley episode because a Necro Butcher, if like the timing is different, this guy might have ended up on national television, and instead he's sort of this like interesting figure. Like here he gets a role in The Wrestler.
Yeah,
he's attached to all these like interesting elements, but it's during this kind of dark period where I'm sure there are plenty of fans that will watch this episode and they know very little about Necro Butcher. And if he was around today, like he'd probably be on national television and making an incredible living at this.
You're 100% right. Yeah. I think it's like the timing of like when his career kind of, when he was active most, even though he's still wrestling today, which gives me a lot of anxiety. But yeah, I mean, he really embodies, similar with Mick, maybe on like another level, he really embodies that sort of like self-sacrifice, impervious to pain, you can't hurt me, sort of mindset going into the wacky performative nature of wrestling. And I think we go deep a little bit on, his childhood and what he went through and what are those traumas, what are those formative moments that made him impervious to pain and someone who is going to put himself and push himself past the limits like anybody. I mean, his head makes contact with concrete multiple times in that match. And then let's not forget, he like after that was like, oh, I got another match I got to wrestle later that night. And it's just crazy. It's just wild. I mean, yeah, he was part of that sort of crew, in the wake of ECW. Boy, he was part of that crew who just pushed things beyond anything we'd ever dreamed, of in that underground deathmatch world. But he's a compelling character, and he's definitely a foundational person who is important, I think, and also somebody who is a student of wrestling, understands the psychology. And even though you might write him off as a garbage kind of wrestler or whatever, like he really does understand the philosophy and all of that stuff of wrestling and applied it to his wild and wacky craft.
Is this the episode that Tony Khan makes his Dark Side of the Ring debut in?
Oh, no, that would have been interesting. I'm sure he would have had something to say.
But sure he saw this match.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, Tony was part of the TNA episodes because of, Jeff is, works at TNA now, and, they're quite close. And that was just sort of an organic, interesting thing. It was like, I'm trying to remember exactly how it happened, but it was like Jeff was like, "Oh, should we ask Tony if he wants to, if he wants to be interviewed for this?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" And then it turned out we were invited backstage to film some B-roll of Jeff, like just working behind the scenes, and shots of him you'll see in the episode, just kind of doing day to day, and also performing, which he still does as well too, and which was great. And then it was like, yeah, we got some time with Tony. Let's sit down. And he was a big fan of the show, which was cool. Did not know that. And then it was like, yeah, he just sat down and gave us some time to talk about Jeff and where he's at today, and that he's in such a better place now than he was just a handful of years ago when everything kind of came crashing down for Jeff, personally, like not just a handful of years ago.
There was a moment this past year at the WWE Hall of Fame, and they announced the class that's going in. One of them is the late Sid Vicious, and we get to the point in the show where they show the graphic for him, but it's sort of like the audience realizing that once you've passed away, you're not going to get like the big celebratory speech. It's going to be this graphic. Yeah. And I look at these episodes as sort of like this season we have the Big Boss Man, the Renegade, Paul Orndorff, and there's a lot of people out there that are, unless you're like in that circle of WWE, you're not going to get like that big career retrospective. There's not going to be a DVD coming out on the Renegade. There's not going to be, hour-long A&E specials on even the Big Boss Man. So
maybe not.
In many ways, I think like fans are like, I think they want to celebrate some of these figures when they have passed. And what I found you guys have done a really great job with these deceased stars is we're so singularly focused on the performer, and you guys extend to like these families are left without a father, a brother, a son, and I think it really does humanize a lot of these figures and get to tell those stories.
I appreciate you saying that, because that really was the goal of this whole series from the jump. There is a tension that we have with the name of the show. There's this tension with Dark Side of the Ring where, it conjures an expectation that, we're going to be digging for the dirt, and it's going to reveal, it's going to look at the business in a negative light, and it's going to try to indict people and things and whatever. And that was never our goal. As anybody knows who's heard us talk, we're diehard fans of wrestling, and it's just the most formative thing in our lives, So we always set out, because whether it's because WWE sort of owned the doc space for wrestlers, like all the docs up to a certain point, with very few exceptions, felt like they were made sort of in the universe of WWE, and there wasn't like much room to understand who these people were outside of it, like humanizing, and that was our goal, was like we really wanted to humanize these performers we grew up idolizing, or we grew up loving as kids, having their action figures, their toys, and so on and so forth, playing as them on video games or whatever. And so that was always the goal, was like, we want, maybe it's warts and all at times, but it's like showing them as people, not as these larger than life caricatures. And that's always been a big part of the show. Maybe not every episode follows that pattern, but that's been a huge like part of like the core DNA. And you see people online who look at our season rosters coming out, and they think, oh, what's dark about this? What's dark about that? And I've always felt like, oh, we don't need to be limited by that. Like maybe the darkness is more just an impressionistic, atmospheric quality about the story. It doesn't need to be so literal, so one-to-one. And I do think Big Boss Man, as a example, he is part of that class of the early to mid 2000s, where there was an epidemic of wrestler deaths, by way of a very awful mixture of certain pharmaceuticals and lifestyle. But for us, this is, yes, like a part of this platform in this show is also, giving stars like him their moment, and also revealing, like you said, the family members, the people behind that person, like, because they're the people that know that person better than anybody else, And so for the Big Boss Man episode, which is huge for me and Jason Eisner personally. I mean, Big Boss Man is the reason I got into wrestling, which is surprising that it took this long to do an episode about him. But yeah, when I was 5 years old, my parents came home with a Big Boss Man action figure. They just bought it because they thought I would think it was cool, and I had no idea what wrestling was or anything. And that was like, what is this? It was like that Hasbro figure. And then that's what sets you on this journey then to understand WWF, Hulk Hogan, all that stuff. So I have a lot of like personal, connection to him. And yeah, and the family, his widow, his daughter, participate in the episode, and they're fantastic. And they bring to life, a portrait of such a such a loving, caring, wonderful individual who, was caught up in the grind of what wrestling schedules were like at that time, and having to provide, and in fear of losing your spot and losing all that cultural stuff that was happening at the time. So it's a very sad episode, but I think it's a great portrait of, him, and shines a light on his legacy and how, truly talented he was, and how he came into the WWF at, when shot right to the top, in the picture with Hogan and all that stuff. So yeah, but yeah, that's something that we try to do. I mean, we did, John Tenta's episode in season 5, and again, that was, people were like, "What's dark about that? He's the nicest guy I've ever met in wrestling," But it was an opportunity to celebrate his legacy, and then just shortly thereafter, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I'd like to think that at least in part our efforts to shine a light on his career had maybe something to do with that, and because that was a great moment for his family, and that's awesome. That's an awesome net result of all of this.
How did you arrive at Missy Hyatt? Like, that's an interesting figure of somebody, heavily like sexualized character at a time when that was very new, especially when you're going back to the World Class days, to Mid-South, and then WCW, and someone that received some incredibly awful treatment in that era of the industry that is sort of a precursor of of public stories we have seen over the ensuing years as well. Tell me a little bit about your approach to that episode.
Yeah, well, she's a fascinating character in the history of wrestling. She's definitely pioneering. She's somebody who performed that sort of lost art of the valet better than anybody, and she came into the business and just like immediately set that bar, and she probably was the most recognizable and famous female personality in wrestling of her era. And we've interviewed her before, and I think at points we'd asked her some questions about her own life and her own career, and we were just kind of blown away by her just vantage point from the things that she's been through, and all the different just like exploitative, tragic things that have happened into her life, and how she's overcome that, and how she's navigated through that, and how that's never led her to be truly bitter about the business. Like, she still loves the business. She's a student of it. She's still constantly watching wrestling and, filling in all the gaps of her knowledge and from different eras and different countries even, and things like that. And I've always been fascinated with her for that. But she is also, an example of what it was like to be a woman in the industry at that time, and the things that one would have had to one that would have had to have endured. For example, there's the WCW lawsuit. She was exploited in a very awful way in the WCW offices, and that of course led to a legal situation that sort of happened again in her post wrestling life. She went on to start a sort of adult business involving some of the female personalities in wrestling, and she was exploited and used and scammed out of money in that situation as well. And so like, there's a lot of that she's had to go through, a lot of addiction issues and mental health crises, and so she just lived through a lot. And it's just again, we like what you were saying also about the Hall of Fame. It's like, it's one thing to do these specials about wrestlers who are no longer with us, but like, these people are with us, and I'm not saying anything's going to happen with her, but like, to be able to tell their story while they're here and to have them tell it in their own words is very powerful. And she's someone we clocked very early on when we did our first interview with her. Like, she'd be great to have to tell her own story, and here was the opportunity to do that, the time to do it.
At this stage of season 7, is it still generally you're coming up with the topics and then seeking out the subjects? And is that like, are you getting pitched by performers, by people that, hey, we want to be profiled? I know you had mentioned like with the Road Warrior animal story, that was one where he came to you guys. Is that a rarity where they come to you? Like, this is an established brand now, and I think people see that these are, stories that are being done with care. I think for most, they have seen that.
Yeah.
The title aside, like that, they understand. I think the
Yeah.
quality that comes with these, that this is a legitimate place to get that type of story out.
Yeah, if they watch the show, or if some that haven't watched the show and they have their opinions on what it is from afar. But yeah, it doesn't happen as much where people are coming to us at this point in time. Just the process has always been, there's so many talented producers and story editors and story producers and people that have been with us for a very long time now, and we're always just kind of getting a room. Nowadays it's more of like a digital room, but we're there and we're just batting around ideas, and we've had a list of stories that we've tracked for years now, going back to the early seasons of the show. And really the most important things for us is our show has always been centered around firsthand information. We've always wanted to, as much as we can, feature voices of people who were there and experienced these stories firsthand. We never try to just get a bunch of experts in a room or tell a story that way, or other wrestlers talking about that to us is just a different show, and it's not as interesting to us. Like, we've always that's why we have the reenactments. It's all that first person perspective. So yeah, there's a long list of episodes of dream ones that we've wanted to do, but you can't cast them, so to speak, with the right voices, because you're not getting that firsthand info. So we kind of look and see at the beginning, like, what can we piece together? Who has a story that kind of meets the criteria, that has all of those, points in their story that are dramatic, or this or that, or something that, would interest a viewer, someone who may not be as fanatical about wrestling as we are, who's going to be interested in this. And so we kind of break down who's available and who would do it. And then we kind of just make phone calls and piece it together. Interesting segue to the Renegade episode. Like, that one was always kind of on the list for many years. Fans on social media have always wanted to see a Renegade episode. And that's where it's like, and this has happened many times, where our instincts are kind of wrong about it, where we're like, that is a tragic story, and there's elements there to it, but can it be 44 minutes? Can it reach that hour mark of, like, all the elements there? And we've kind of pushed it down the line year after year because of that thought, fear, whatever. And then it's like, it proves, like, once you actually start making some phone calls and you actually start talking to, like in the episode, his first wife, is in the episode, a friend that, worked with him in the early days before he got into wrestling. And you start to understand, whoa, yeah, there's a story here and it's just not out there in the world and on the internet. This is a whole other portrait of this person that, is super compelling. So yeah, so that's kind of the process. It's just like, looking at, like, what's something that's makeable and that fits our criteria in terms of access, and then can it be done? And then sometimes you have to just put boots on the ground, or make some phone calls, and you realize some of these ideas you've been thinking aren't going to work are actually totally viable and going to work. And there's more than enough there that, yeah. So
I have two final questions. The first one, we go back to 2019 and season 1 is about to come out.
Yeah.
This is pre-AEW. TNA isn't even on Access TV at this point. I believe they're on something called the Pursuit Network. NXT
Wow.
is streaming only on the WWE Network. We fast forward to season 7. We have pro wrestling on major cable and streaming pretty much every single night of the week.
Yep.
How have you found navigating towards grabbing fans' attention when there is so much out there? Or do you almost view it that, like, we have kind of carved out our own lane that is separate from all the hours of professional wrestling that is now so easily accessible, and this fight for fans' time?
Yeah, I think it's well, I think overall it's great that, wrestling is so prevalent, especially on cable. Because, you know, in any of the other projects I've tried to do that aren't wrestling related, it's tough because trying to get viewers onto cable is very hard in 2026. But wrestling fans are used to watching cable every week, and you can point them in this direction more easily than you can with other audience demographics or what have you. It's funny going back to 2019 because uh, you know, when Vice there's like, this is 2 or 3 regimes ago. This is a totally different team of people around at that time. But there wasn't a lot of belief that a show like ours could work on cable TV at that point in time. Because yeah, how are we going to, wrestling, there wasn't a lot of faith in that. And it actually, you know, like our show was going to be shelved for a very long time. That was a big possibility that was about to occur in 2019. And we were very disheartened by that because we had put so much work into the first season and we thought we hit it out of the park. Like we thought, oh wow, this is going to be great and this show is going to do very well. But those at the company at the time did not believe that. And I remember when it was like this, I can't remember exactly the dates, but it was this amazing moment when I think AEW, did they even have the name AEW? I can't even remember.
They
But
had
it was
just
like,
done their big kickoff press conference in January, but
okay,
yeah, their first pay-per-view is May of
right,
that year.
okay,
So
right, okay, so right. So what wound up happening was they put out a press release saying that we've done a deal with what was it, TBS? What was the first original? Um,
they were rumored with Showtime, and then they announced a deal with Warner Brothers
Oh,
Discovery.
okay, that was probably what it was. But there was some big press release that came out that they had landed a TV deal.
Right.
And then I was like, I remember like taking that and like literally going to the company. Me and another producer inside Vice took that information and we brought it to them and we're like, look, guys, first time maybe in a very long time, years, decades, where you're going to see 2 wrestling companies c- effectively competing for fans' attention on cable. This is our time. It couldn't be a better time for us to be in the mix on this, and that's really a huge part of what pushed the show to finally get on air was because of that. And demonstrating, I think it was that first AEW show where there was I think we used the metrics of their all in show. Like people flew in. This
Mm-hmm.
is an affluent, because there was a lot of negative stereotypes about wrestling watchers on cable that they had no money, they were worthless to advertisers. That was another stigma we had to fight against. And no, it's the opposite. Look how much money people are spending going to these shows. And so that all of that helped us get to where we are and to now know how popular and prevalent still wrestling is on all types of different media now. I think only helps each other. I think we all kind of help each other in some weird way, you know.
Last thing I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you about, I want you to put your documentary critique hat on.
Okay.
Earlier this year, we got the 4-part Hulk Hogan Real American series on Netflix. I'm going to assume you saw it. Tell me why it was so disappointing.
Okay. I'm going to be honest. I have not completed it. Okay. I watched the first part and, look, there's obviously a lot that's left on the table there. That's an understatement in
A
terms of
lot.
the story. Like it's not even close. But look, it's hard for me to watch. It's even hard for me to watch wrestling nowadays. Okay. And it's not out of like, I'm not into the product or any of that stuff. It's just when it's your job, maybe you can relate to this in some way. Uh, every day we deal with all this stuff. It's almost like the last thing I want to do is put on a wrestling documentary. And it's just, it's tough. And then it's tough for me because it's like, it's just hard. It's hard when you're doing the same thing and to watch that kind of stuff. But I will get to it eventually and find the time for it that I want it, like the other time that I do have to spend on that. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, all of the like the real story of Hulk Hogan and and the first several years of his career is so highly compelling. But I will say I have dived into pieces of what the Lapsed Fan podcast is doing,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing an incredible, like meticulous,
They do really great work.
day by day analysis, dare I say, of Hulk Hogan's career that they're just doing from now until the end of time. Probably it'll probably take them to the end of their lives before they complete their Hulk Hogan deep dive. So I encourage people for further reading if they want to get real deep into the nuances of Hogan's career as an alternative to that doc. Check that out because it's incredible what they're doing. They're talking to a lot. They're going deep. They're talking to a lot of the people that are still with us that were there at the formation of his career, and it's amazing. It's amazing what they're doing. So definitely check that out.
I think there's an open laneway for, and I think she will be completely on board to do it. Is Brooke, who I think wanted to be part of this whole project that is out there, and
you're right.
There was a lot left from that Netflix series, but
totally.
I've kept you very long here, Evan.
All good.
Wish you all the best going into season number 7. You're going to be doing a screening in New York City on Monday, July the 6th with Jeff Jarrett. You guys are going to be screening the first 2 parts for people that show up. It's free to go check out the screening if you want to mention where people can go. And then, of course, the season premiere is Tuesday night, July 7th, 9 Eastern on Vice.
Yep. New York City, we're doing a show with Jeff at the Metrograph Cinema, or the Metrograph Theater, in Manhattan. Great venue if you've never been. Incredible theater. It's awesome that we're getting to do this there. So that's on Monday, July 6th at, I think it's at 7 p.m. It's probably sold out. But anyway, that's happening. And we're going to do one in Los Angeles. Maybe, I think by the time this airs, that information will be out there as well. And also, John, Toronto is coming potentially for a screening. So stay tuned.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not. I don't think for the TNAs, but we might do another screening. Stay tuned. You'll be first to know about that, I'm sure. And Tuesday, July 7th, season 7. How great is it, by the way? Like, I'm a marketing genius, right? Season 7 on 7/7, right? Come on.
Perfect.
So there we go. So tune in 9 p.m. Eastern for the premiere, and you're not going to want to miss it. Even to all the skeptical people, 3 hours on Jeff Jarrett. Trust me, this is a wild ride, this story. So
I think you could do 3 parts on TNA for the end of eternity.
Yes.
You have many regimes to still navigate through all of this. You could do like a Jackie Brown where it's Jeff Jarrett this season, it's Dixie another, it's Scott D'Amore, Carlos Silva, Ed Nordholm. I mean, like, that company is your oyster that you can ride for years to come. So we thank you as always. On a personal note, Evan, I really appreciate how whenever the seasons come up, you always make yourself available to come chat with our audience. I think they always enjoy our chats together and going over the seasons. So continued success to you and the whole team. And your recent Canadian Screen Award, Best Factual Series that you took home. So nice to see the mainstream picking up on the Dark Side of the Ring success.
Yeah, that was awesome. And we can't forget, you're also making an appearance on this season too. So look out for yourself on the new season.
Keep your eyes open, folks, okay? You want to talk about hard to land guests? They got the big one from Muhammad Hassan and got me back this season as well.
We did.
So look out for that, everyone. Again, July 7th, it kicks off with Jeff Jarrett and TNA. So a big thank you to Evan, and we'll be back. Keep listening here to Post Wrestling.
See ya.